I recently produced a film on the impending removal of grandfather rights under the CSCS Card Scheme. It was very well received, but probably not by those running the scheme. That video prompted groundworker Ollie to produce his own film for his growing social media audience. Given that we both had such strong feelings on the subject, I reached out to Ollie with a view to recording a podcast together. What I was expecting to be a 15-minute conversation ended up running for several hours. Now, I've picked the highlights of that conversation in the episode that is about to begin, and I started by asking Ollie what prompted him to make his video in the first place. Oh, and I realise this will probably be lost on anyone that's listening to this rather than watching it, but we shot this on site in February, and yes, Ollie's wearing shorts.
Well, firstly, your video kind of sparked something in me, and I thought, I've got a problem here, because one of my own cards, my gold CSCS card that I got all the way back when I was an assistant site manager, that is, affected by this, right? Industry accreditation. Back then, the site manager at the time, the project manager, vouched for me, etc. And it's it's going to run out in December 2024. So I was affected by it myself. And then I thought, well, why didn't I know that? Because I'm pretty across, I like to think I'm across these things. So I thought, well, if I don't know, I dare say there's a whole load more people that don't know. You've got a decent following. But I thought, well, be a good topic to do a video on, isn't it? Make people aware, work together, try and get a bit of a kind of heads up, guys, because if you're sat there in October next year and you haven't done your MVQ, you're screwed. It's too late, really. The deadline might be December, but as you know, it takes time to do your MVQ. So my take, though, on the whole situation, I think it's unreasonable to change the goalposts, which I feel they've done. When the CSCS scheme was started, you could get industry accreditation, which has been running for a long time. And I appreciate that it was in 2015, I think they initially announced that this was to change. But what's wrong with letting the people who've got industry accreditation, they've been fine on sites for the last 15 to 20 years, what's wrong with letting them, for better term, die out, retire out, whatever the term might be? Why are they qualified today and in December they're not qualified? I don't understand. It's just unreasonable to ask some of these guys who are getting older, we've got the skills shortage, whatever, there's lots of arguments this I'm sure we'll go into, but it just seems unreasonable to change the goalposts, which they've done, because it was fine for so long.
One of my takes on this is it, in many ways, is a double whammy. There is this concentration on this will affect the older generation. I don't consider you to be the older generation, but it's going to impact you. But I think moreover, I think the industry has always relied upon that idea of mentorship, where the young upstart arrives on site and he's taken under the wing of somebody that's been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. If those guys now leave en masse, who's going to train the next generation? And I'm not talking about training in terms of gaining a competence card, because I have question marks about that anyway, but actually learning the ropes, learning how a site actually works, learning how a machine actually works. We're potentially going to lose at the top end and at the bottom end of the industry, aren't we?
Indeed. I think it's a wide issue, because the best people are trained by the people who've done it before, the older generation. The problem with that scheme, as someone, and putting my manager hat back on, is how do I prove what has and hasn't been taught by that guy? Because as we know, people do teach bad habits as well as good ones, and they teach outdated methods versus some more modern techniques. Although generally construction hasn't changed since the Egyptians built pyramids, really, has it? Fundamentally, we still use string lines, levels, etc., and various methods of technology to improve that. But the basics haven't really changed. Stuff needs to move from A to B and be created in some way. I see your point, and I agree with you that but the problem is how we couldn't really prove that anyway. And I see where they're coming from with trying to upskill the workforce. So the way I look at it is the guys should stay, the older generation should stay, and we want them as long as possible. And we do want their input, but it unfortunately, you just can't put a tangent on what that is. And therefore, under your Safety Act, how do you prove they're trained, competent, etc.? What we would probably want is a better apprentice scheme that then can prove that they've been taught this, taught that. They're bringing, well, it's actually what the NVQ is fundamentally. The older people would help with that, of course, your older generations and your experienced workers. But I see the mentor thing as being a bit unregulated at the moment. And it would be better if it was, well, it needs to be much better improved.
I agree with that, but going back to what you're saying about being able to measure, do you look at any competence card and think, this guy is clearly the top of his game, that's what... It doesn't prove anything, does it?
Indeed. And I'm certainly not arguing that the current system is where we should be either. It's a joke really that let's take plant, for example, plant operating, something I do a lot of. The highest MVQ you can get in that's level 2, which I think is the equivalent, isn't it, of GCSE or something, I think. And that's it. It doesn't matter if you've been operating a plant for 50 years and you can make that excavator spin on one track dance, or whatever. There's lots of technical aspects to machine operating. You are level 2, whether you've just come out from the week's training or, well, you need to do your MVQ after that. But you know what I mean? Essentially, after 2 years, you can achieve the same MVQ, and that is the same card when you walk in the door as the next man who's been operating for 30 or more years. And that is an absolute crying shame. I've got lots of ideas to reform the card system. I see a lot of potential in it. I think fundamentally it was started with a good idea, but what it's become is a tick box exercise. Because if you're, I think I said this in my video, if you're a load of rubbish, you'll get kicked off site anyway, very, very quickly. So that blue card just ticks a box for your induction, right? Have you been trained? Nor was a blue card tick, even the red card actually ticks the same box, arguably. You could just do your red card training every 2 years and sod the MVQ. It is a joke.
It absolutely is. So going back to your level 2 and the fact that a newcomer and a 50-year veteran are on the same level, that potentially means, I know it probably doesn't in practice, but that potentially means they're earning the same. If I've been there and done it, got the T-shirt, and I can make the machine dance on one track, and I'm being paid the same as a guy who's still wet behind the ears, I'm going to be pretty pissed off about that.
Well, indeed. I think you've got... that goes into the way that people are employed in the construction industry, which is a whole nother can of worms that, again, is just a joke, really. People aren't treated the way they should be or with the respect that they should be for the experience they bring. If you're on an agency and you walk in the door, how do I judge you? How do I know how competent you are and how experienced you are? I've got 2 people in front of me. Arguably, it could be the same age, because there are people that, of course, come out of other games or industries or of course, want to, how they see it, upskill themselves, get off to tools and think, well, the excavator job, that looks good, or forklifts or all of this. So you can't, as a site manager, you cannot tell who comes in the door and how good they are. Within 10 minutes out there, you'll know. But are they paid the same? If you're an agency, probably, because the bloke who doesn't know what he's doing will blag that he does, and the man who does know what he's doing will probably say, well, he's essentially saying the same thing, right? Quite quickly, though, you'll know the difference, I think. If you were employed and you worked for or you even were a long-term subcontractor of some people, and you had a bit of respect behind you, your skills were appreciated in your experience, then of course you probably will earn more actually than the younger lads who are still being trained and up and coming, of course. But I mean, one of my ideas for the CSCS card, or overall, is that we have, the problem is you risk alienating people with this scheme, but hear me out. My idea would be that you could get, with the level 2, there's no progression, and they always talk about continual personal development, I believe, is something that they always talk about. It's the same principle of sending kids to A-levels and A-levels to university. There is no constant personal development or continual personal development in construction or demolition or any of, I think, the trades, really. But especially with plant operating as a subject we've picked, you're stuck with a level 2, as we say. It's a level playing field. You can't go anywhere from there. I can't prove to you walking in that door that I know more than the next man. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could? And the card scheme's almost set up there for it. It's got the potential to do it. The blue card arguably is kind of what it's trying to say, because, you know, well, you've done it for a few years, you've completed an MVQ, but it's so easy to manipulate, or even just you end up working in one area. You might be really, really good at demolition, but you've never dug a drain in your life or gone for deep excavation. You might be excellent loading lorries in the quarry, in the crusher, but you've never worked on a building site, blokes around you. These are just two examples of situations that are arguably the use of excavator, but in a completely different field. Well, wouldn't it be great if you get a, let's say, level 3 MVQ, and you can fill in these, you've got all these topics that you could potentially do, and throughout your career you think, yeah, you know what, I'm on deep drainage for the next few months, I can do this module now, and I can prove that, and you can stick it onto your card, so that when they scan it, and they've all got chips in, remember, never used, but they've all got chips in, you could potentially, you know, man could sign your thing in. Oh, right, Dave, yeah, well, you've got the deep drainage here, and you've done that. I can see you've completed this. The portfolio's there, you know, you what a great way of proving competency, which, by the way, trained, competent and authorised are the three things that you need to be to drive plant, right? That's how I would see it. And you could build your categories up. The demolition guys, high reach, you know, got a high reach thing, you know, here's some experience, here's some buildings I've taken down. You have all of that within that card, proving your competency. That's how I would see it.
We'll come back to your other thoughts on how to improve the card scheme in a second. You mentioned agencies, and one of the things that strikes me is we've allowed this industry to end up with too many layers. There was a move probably in the last decade or so to take men primarily off the books. You know, back when I started in this business, you know, Balfour Beatty and Mason, people like that, they employed hundreds, if not thousands of people. They've gradually pushed them off the books, and now they pick them up and put them down when they see fit. But those agencies aren't doing that for the good of their health. They're doing that because there's money to be made. And that money's going to come from somewhere. And I would say exactly the same about the card schemes. You know, we've got CITB, under which we've got CSCS, CPCS, NOCN, CCDO, NPAWS. There are so many of these, and every one of them is taking a cut. And every one of them is taking a cut effectively off the back of the working man or woman.
Yeah, they are. The problem is, I don't even know really who creates these things, and they do a really good job of it, because they create these layers, as you say, of stuff, and it means nothing to me. I only have to have a CSCS card because people ask for it, and it's the box tick. It doesn't, as I say, it doesn't matter. If I'm rubbish, they'll kick me off site anyway in 10 minutes. So all it does is get me in the door, and I have to pay to play. It is pay to play, isn't it?
How is that fair? We're talking podcasts and video at the moment. I've had to invest in a camera and a microphone and stuff like that. But that's basically me off and running. I don't have to pay anyone. And yet people within construction, within demolition, within the trades, have to pay in order to be allowed to work. That's not far off slavery, if you ask me.
No, I guess not. I kind of see the idea behind it, like the basic principle of having one system that allows you to demonstrate, and managers and people running construction projects to sort of at least be content that you have had some form of training which complies with the regulations that are in our industry. And I agree that it's pay to play. The problem is it's gone too far, isn't it, really? The idea of the safety test, in essence, is a good one. It proves a basic understanding of site. It has got different categories depending on what you do. So that's I get that. That's a good idea. You know, if you do the manager's one, there's a whole lot more questions than there are if you do the labourer's one. Good idea. You know, that the principle is there. It's just becoming, there's more and more layers put on, all of which are cost.
What about the notion of card refreshing and renewal? I don't know how long you've been doing what you are doing now, but have you ever woke up one morning and thought, I've forgotten how to do that? Some vital information has fallen out of my head, and therefore I need to go and sit another test.
Well, no, but every 5 years I do go, how do we renew this thing again? And it kind of changes slightly every time, or the fee changes, or you need the new book, and questions change. So I never lose the information, although of course you do lose familiarity. I mean, let's face it, the hardest part of that whole safety test is construction signage and fire extinguishers, because nobody can remember what colour a fire extinguisher does what, can they? That is like number one thing to revise, isn't it? So I don't use a fire extinguisher every day. I see them, but you just don't, you go past them, don't you?
This is pretty much how I am with Microsoft Excel. I have to relearn it every time I use it. But so saying that, you just said, the rules change slightly and everything else. Have you ever renewed a card after the allotted 5 years and come away thinking, I'm quite clearly, demonstrably more competent than I was the day I walked in that office?
Well, no, but then that's kind of my point with this whole, continual personal development. Why can't you add things to that card that then make you want to keep it? It almost sort of hoists by its own petard in the fact that it makes it quite easy to get, and on a lower scale that should be how it is. But once you've achieved a certain level, wouldn't it be nice to have a bit of a challenge to get the next bracket, the next thing? That's how I see it. I mean, some guys won't want to prove that they've done this kind of work. Maybe they do it every day, but they're not academically gifted, or they feel they can't kind of present their work. I get that. I've worked with people who unfortunately struggle to put their name on the end of an induction form. But they were the guys who, God, they can teach me something about drains. Those boys knew how to lay a drain. So just because you can't do that one thing over here doesn't mean to say they're not very experienced. If you abolish the card scheme, which I know is quite a popular theory, because of all the reasons you mentioned, it is, getting expensive. It doesn't really do what it sets out to achieve. It's become almost disregarded. You go to HS2, I believe, or I don't know, Hinckley or somewhere, and they've got their own complete card scheme, induction, etc. It's pointless, isn't it? Why have I got this one when you're then saying I need this one over here? It should be one card for all.
When you're talking about those projects, they are among the biggest projects in Europe, involving some of the biggest construction companies in Europe, who are demonstrating by their actions the fact that they have virtually no faith in the card scheme.
Yeah, indeed.
Does that card scheme have any validity whatsoever if the biggest names in the industry are looking at it and going, no, not good enough?
Well, no. Essentially, the same as it's undermined by the fact that it just ticks a box. There's nothing else to it, and unfortunately it's gone that way, and it shouldn't have done, but it slowly has, and now we're in a situation where, do you even need a card to get on HS2? To get on it. Do you need to get on it, but then they won't accept it as the only thing? They want you then trained further, or I don't know how it works.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I think a CSCS gets you on the site, and then you have to be
paid to
tested and inducted again. Yeah. You do hang out on social media. I don't know if you've been offered, but I certainly have. There are lots of people out there offering fake cards.
Oh yeah, are they any good?
I don't know. I've never bought one. but they realise.
Somebody try it. Let me know.
Some people have.
I need 900 quid for an MVQ, so I could do with one painted gold, please.
But the situation that we've got now, bearing in mind they are readily available. I know they pop up and they pop off, and they pop back and they pop off. But those cards, those fake cards, fake in one way or another, are readily available. If we've got a situation where people are potentially having to pay thousands of pounds in order to do the job that they've been doing for the last 30 years, we're effectively pushing some people towards the crooks, aren't we?
Yeah, for sure. But then that is all part of undermining the card scheme anyway, isn't it? The fake ones are undermining it, but also the people who aren't the site managers and whoever, who are running the sites aren't checking these cards. They've all got a chip on. Well, that chip links back to a database. That database has, it'll tell you whether it's real or not very, very quickly, because they can't fake that bit, I'd have thought.
They can't fake that bit, but I mean, we played
checks them.
Well, nobody checks it, but there's more than that, because there are, there's been BBC exposés on this, where companies they will actually sit the exam for you.
Oh, right.
You are required to go to a test, and they will, number 14, A, number 15, C. So it's what you end up with is a kosher card from the CITB or CSCS,
okay.
But you have not actually done the work in order to prove that you are competent. So again, it's another level of doubt over the whole card scheme.
Well, if someone wants to help me get through the fire extinguisher bit, I'm all ears. So
I think a tattoo is the answer. Blue. But it does feel like we need an overhaul. And I know you've said you've got ideas for cards. And does it begin and end at this sort of continual personal development, or have you got other ideas for us?
The weird thing is, I don't want to come across as particularly supporting the scheme, because I think it's a complete farce and I hate it. And it doesn't completely summarise our industry, because there's many other things that do as well. But it's just one of those sort of elements. You just think, it just proves what a mess we're in, really. It's not fit for purpose anymore. It's undermined by everyone, from HS2 needing their own thing to, people having fake ones, people not checking, all of the things we've discussed. And I just think it's a real shame. So I have ideas, though, because I still believe the core principle of the card scheme when it's brought in was a good one. It's no longer run by CITB. I mean, CITB is a whole nother, we could do a whole nother podcast on CITB, I'm sure. But as the industry representatives, really, for us, they should still run the scheme, in my opinion. And they should be offering, improved training, a level of being able to upskill yourself, whoever you are, whether you're a carpenter, if you're in demolition, if you're in... I don't see why you just have this sort of, you're a carpenter, mate, that's all I do. I mean, even bricklayers, there's bricklaying. I mean, there's a lot of guys who just lay the middle, they can't do a corner. What's that about? You a bricklayer, or are you laying to a string line? That's sort of... But there should be... The people who can do those chimneys like Hampton Court have, with all the twisted brickwork, that's a trade, isn't it? But I dare say there's not many people in the industry who can do that kind of thing, but they will be out there. But when you walk in the door with a card, well, your card saves mine, mate. There's no differential. It's
that's the difference between a tradesman and a craftsman.
Well, possibly. But why can't you then, as a tradesman, look to upskill yourself, look to prove that you can do that, and you have done that? And MVQs are a good basis to do it on. They don't need to be that expensive. I mean, the last MVQ I did was a telehandler. I did my telehandler ticket. COVID means that the bloke doesn't even come out to you anymore. You send videos. So I paid 800-900 quid, whatever it was, to do that NVQ level 2. I'm sure it's that kind of money. It was a fair bit of chunk anyway. And I mean, I did some very simple videos with the little telehandler that I've got here, that little turbo one. I mean, it's mini. If I could have, there's a whole different skill putting something to 3 meters of that telehandler will go as there is to putting it to 17 meters on a loading bay. So it's difficult because people work in different environments, they do different things, and therefore it has to cover a range, doesn't it? But that was just, you fill out some forms. He did ask you some questions. You have like an interview bit, but it's not very difficult. And you pay a lot of money for that. And I think, sorry, but that probably could have been done for 200 quid.
First and foremost, I was told, and I don't know if this is true, but I was told a while back that the actual card itself costs about 70p to produce.
Oh, no doubt, yeah.
But they're sold to you for about 18 quid. Having done it, the actual cost to you is about 18 quid. So there's that. Going back to that whole CPD idea, and what you just said there about during COVID using video, would there not be an argument now for having GoPros in the cabs of machines so that you log what you're doing on an ongoing basis, so that rather than waiting for, in your example, I need to get my telehandler ticket, to be able to go to the examiners and say, I've already done 10,000 hours on a telehandler, but I now need a ticket. I'll do the interview over the phone, but here's everything that you can possibly want to know. I've produced all this. Is there an argument for that?
Possibly. The issues I see, you want to have whatever the scheme is that it will, we hope it becomes from this conversation. Who knows if the CITB listening to what we've got to say, but I think there's a few barriers to entry there. The GoPros are expensive. I mean, MVQs are expensive, but so are GoPros. Now, yes, you can borrow one and things, but not everyone has access to the video editing software or computer that's powerful enough. You and I do. I think we become used to that almost, but many people don't. And I kind of see that as a bit of a barrier to them doing it. And why should someone be able to do that who can, or get their kids to do it or whatever it might be, and then, the poor bloke, someone else can't, he doesn't have access to that kind of material. I mean, that's what the logbook was for, right? Which we used to have in plant, if we're talking down the plant route. I actually don't know what you would prove as a carpenter, whether you'd have to take photos with your phone and collate them, etc. And I don't know what the scheme would be if you were, another type of tradesman, a plumber, whoever that might be. But the logbook, I think they've now scrapped. That at least had some very easy, anyone could fill it in. And this is the part of the problem as well, though. And then it got signed off by a site manager or someone in a position of deemed authority. And it proves that you've done the job that you said you'd done. Now, in the digital age, maybe something a bit, because most people have smartphones now, I think, don't they? So maybe a spin on your idea would be that you can log into your portfolio, your card essentially online, because they will be on a database, right, which the chip will link back to. You can log in on that and you could say, I've been doing this job for the last few weeks. Here's some photos I've taken. Upload them off your phone, straight to your portfolio. Bit of blurb, did the drainage, it was 3 meters deep. We did here, we had a road crossing, the headers, all that sort of stuff. Well, that's probably a bit more of an accessible way of doing it, because you don't need, you can just do it on your phone, really.
Is there some role here for the equipment manufacturers? You're right, GoPros are expensive. But we've got some machines now that you can operate via smartphone. In fact, I know of one manufacturer would actually give you a smartphone because that's your control panel. But also you've got lots of telematics built into machines now. So not only could you, were a JCB, for example, to put a camera in the cab, you've got a system of telematics that logs who did what and when. So, was the machine over-revved? Were the daily checks carried out as in accordance to the handbook? Was it unstable at any point in time? How many hours did they work? Well, you've got all of that information. Is there a role for the manufacturers there?
Possibly, but of course there's two flips to that, isn't there? Because the more you log and the more people know what you're doing, people feel like they're being controlled and it's, kind of oppressive. But they are. Right? It's sort of irony, but that's the kind of the counter argument to that. But then on the upside, I mean, telematics behind machines, my 3CX will basically tell me everything. The idle diesel is horrendous. You look at it and go, wasn't idling that long today, but you tell LiveLink and it'll go, oh, well, I've used like 8 litres of idling. It's expensive to run that coffee machine. So, there's a lot you can tell from that. And JCB, no doubt, beyond that, have got a lot of information and can tell if the handbrake's on or not, and if the boom's been parked in the air, or if it's been around with that, or all of that kind of thing. And that has some huge advantages if we're looking to try and, I guess, counteract some of the historic issues that we've had with misuse of plant, for example, bad driving, or people sat there idling away, hiding around the corner, or whatever it might be. But in a way also, it maybe gives people a bit too much information, and some people won't be happy with that. They already feel, they're being infringed. I mean, the thing is that the worst thing is in your pocket, because that thing is telling you, well, I dare say I'll get a load of adverts now for some kind of telematic system, or maybe even, hopefully, these fake CSCS cards, or people that help you get through your fire thing. But that's true, isn't it? There's so much that these things listen to. Every time you go on Facebook and like something, it logs all of this stuff.
I thought that was always a coincidence when Facebook offered you the very thing you've been searching for 5 minutes before.
Well, how do you believe it? but you see what I mean? Like there is data has two flip sides, and I wonder if because dash cams, essentially, manufacturers could put dash cams in machines that could potentially log. If there were instances, we would have video footage of it. I mean, that could be hugely beneficial. But also, in a way, do we really want a society where we have to film everything? But this is a much bigger question. But you know what I mean? Yeah, I would feel a bit oppressed at work if I knew, someone could. I'm part of the team that clear snow from Heathrow, and all of the lorries, all of the vans have got two-way facing cameras, and that's how it is there now. It logs your audio, it logs that. They can tell if you've requested permission on the runway, all of that. It records all of that. It records the radio, the inter-vehicle as well. You can work with it, but it's a bit oppressive, I just think, God, I just think I know why they brought it in. They brought it in for a reason. They're always trying to avoid the next accident, and they had a big crash and things that, happen. Things happen there. Everything's happened at any site, everything's happened somewhere, isn't it? But it is a work environment. It's not particularly friendly.
I've blamed everybody for the fiasco that is the current card scheme. What about the people we employ? Oh, I mean, you've mentioned the fact, some people can't sign their name, and, some people just aren't that way inclined. I fully understand that. But as an industry, we have been forever, I think, to a large degree, a bit of a last resort for some people.
No.
I can't get a job elsewhere, and therefore construction or demolition will take me. And going back to that idea of dash cams and monitoring and everything else, but think about some of the things that we've seen over the past few years. The advent of quick couplers, the quick couplers, the All Quicks and the Lendhoffs of this world. They were basically created because operators couldn't be trusted to get out of the cab in the pissing rain and bang a pin in. We've also got beacons on machines now to prove that the guy's got his seatbelt on, even though some of them are actually sat on them.
Yes.
We are putting in place all of these checks and balances because the people we're employing are not doing what they need to do. Would we necessarily need to prove competence and have it refreshed every 5 minutes if the people we were employing were maybe a higher level?
Well, that is a very good point. Very good point. And no, really, would probably be the short answer to quite a long question. We shouldn't. This is a major issue, and it's one of the fundamental reasons why we're struggling to get a workforce, younger people into the industry, anyone into the industry, because you're looked at, I think, in this game. They have high vis. I mean, I walk around the shop with my stuff on, and people just, I don't know, you get looks sometimes, and you think this is you just look down on, really. And you think, well, actually, I earn good money doing this, and I've got a Lamborghini's worth of equipment sat out there.
And that house,
all that,
and that house that you live in wouldn't exist without construction.
Well, that's
the
true.
Roads that you've just driven on wouldn't exist without.
Correct. Every time you go to the toilet, that's thank you. That's there. Well, we're doing that. Yep, no problem. And but this is it. But you're not. They don't see it like that, unfortunately. If I sold all my machines and bought the Lamborghini, people would be filming you and think you're some kind of superhero. And you think it's a very strange thing. You tell about a digger, isn't it? But that's the attitude. I think the whole of society looks down on the trades, and it's a real shame. Further to that, you then end up with people going to university who maybe it didn't suit them. Maybe they would have been great in the trades, but they miss that opportunity. They get funneled down a certain route. But that's also partly the trades and the construction industry's fault. I say construction industry is a broader term, including demolition, any what I would call hands-on trade, manufacturing even. Because there are very, very few routes into it. I really had to struggle when I was younger to get into it. And I remember even at college, they sat me down and went, why are you not going to university? Basically sort of almost trying to belittle you and go, well, you're going to, drop out and become a, road sweeper. Well, actually, I probably would do that. Yeah, it'd be all right. What's wrong with that? I joke, but I always think, if you didn't have any work, I'd do whatever it took to push a broom around. It's actually an easy enough job if you know the right technique of sweeping. It's an attitude thing, isn't it? It's sort of the schools starts at school, and it just doesn't help as it gets older, and the people do fall into this industry. A lot of people, are maybe. They're more open to doing recreational drugs at the weekends, possibly. People who like to drink quite a bit of alcohol in the industry. Plenty of them in bankers as well, mind you, both of those things. So this isn't particularly just pertaining to the construction industry, but you do end up with a workforce that have challenges that maybe some other industries don't necessarily see, because that individual wouldn't suit an office environment, so by default, they don't end up there, do they? They end up with us. And then as a result, we're trying to do quite complicated, detailed work with dangerous equipment. And it just spirals down, doesn't it, really? And then you've got to bring the next thing in, haven't you? I had safety departments, in-house safety departments for the people I worked for, and they should work with you, right? They come out to site and they do a report on your site, and it should be a collaborative thing. I remember discussing issues I had on jobs, particularly stairwells were a common one, trying to protect stairwells. Plasterers, the problem is you can't have the safety stairs in a stairwell that the plasterer is trying to plaster, because if it touches the walls, you can't plaster it, right? So you have these issues. So you come up with ways around it. And, you know, standing on the path on a bit of board and a bit of plank and something is not good anymore. You know, it's not right, and it never should have been right. But it's how it maybe traditionally was done, just to get over the problem, turn the blind eye, as they say. Well, it's not right. So I said, how are we going to get over this? Because these systems, and we had this stupid stair hatch system, and oh God, it was hard work. Someone had to lug it in there, build the frame, you know. Anyway, you come up with these systems that kind of work, but they sort of don't. And I just remember discussing it with, in a particularly large stairwell I had that was maybe 3 stories high. How do we protect this? You know, because the scaffold, you put scaffold in there, then it's in the way of the tacker, so it's got to come out. Do I then put it back in for the plasterer? It's got to come back out again. You know, then the painter wants it in. Where are we going? So you have to have a reasonable, and it's reasonable, remember, is the word that's used in safety, way of dealing with that. Whatever element, whether it be this particular situation we're talking about or whatever. The safety department wrote that down. I remember they wrote it down on my thing like it was a breach, you know, like I was wrong. And I lost marks because I had mentioned an issue that I wanted to discuss. I have a problem here. I'm raising it to you. Tell me how we can solve it. Let's work together. I bet this issue develops on other sites, and they probably hide it. Or safety guys coming out tomorrow, yeah, better drop that and don't work in that plot. You know, I'll lead him round here. I mean, it all goes on.
We're still,
right, is it?
We're still in an industry where somebody expressing a safety concern can be blacklisted.
Yes.
You know,
Yes, yeah.
He's a troublemaker. He is. Get him off the site, and you know, if anybody asks for a reference, tell him he's a troublemaker. Mm-hmm. It's madness.
It is, and it again belittles the safety department because everyone sees them as the enemy. They're like the Stasi. They come on, and it's just like trying to, you know, not get shot, basically, isn't it? It's just horrendous, and it's the wrong way to look at safety. Safety should be collaborative. Everyone should it should be genuinely useful to the people who are having to work underneath that either that control measure or whatever. That's how I see it. You know, you've got to come up with ways to help the guy on site do the job he needs to do safer, and that starts at design processes, with designing buildings that don't have stupid triple height atriums with no way of getting to them, you know. But it does, doesn't it? That's what CDM was for. Construction Design Management Regulations, brought in 2007, I think I'd say around about that time, to basically hold designers accountable for buildings that went up. And in theory, there should have been a method statement at design stage as to how I was to build that element. Have you ever had one of them? I tell you what I got, Mark. We ended up with drawings with a load of little exclamation marks, triangles on them, you know, like hazard triangles, going danger of height here. Oh, cheers for that. That's really helped me out.
Yeah, that's a risk assessment thing, isn't it? We've assessed it. There's a risk.
Yeah.
A fix, maybe? Maybe just an idea?
Well, actually, you identify your risk, and then you would put in place control measures, which should then, on your risk assessment, remove or reduce the risk of that happening, because it's likelihood and severity, right? Well, this clearly doesn't happen. Or I don't find it happens. And this is a much wider issue, and we're almost off cards, but it's all brought into the same thing. If people respected safety properly, you would have people wearing their seatbelt in cabs rather than going, oh, great, green beacon, you know, bloody thing. I mean, I've had some dumpers now they're militant about it. You won't let you start it. You can't move it without the horn beeping in forwards and backwards. You've got to have your seatbelt plugged in. If you just, you know, and you sometimes need to like just nip off or have a look down the side. If your bum cheek leaves half the seat, it cuts out. Oh, this is hard work. But that's where we've ended up with, because it's rather than go, the operator was at fault for that. He drove that machine with the arm in the air, halfway up a heap, and it fell over. What do? We don't blame the operator, no, we put a control measure on it. We need the latest X-Watch system, not blaming them or whoever, but the latest restrictive, hydraulically restrictive system that stops you being able to raise the arm at that point on that degree of angle. And, our new system, we've saved to solve the problem, haven't we? Where do you go? You just think, no, train the blokes to not do it in the first place,
It's exactly the same as all these like reverse alarms and stuff like that. People shouldn't be there.
Wow.
Yeah. If you're, as a transfer station, as an example, if you're working a big 40, 50 ton wheel loader, don't have people walking about. There you go. That's the end of it.
That is something, a site that's a topic that's dear to my heart. My concept of how a building site works is completely different to how we actually do it. I think transfer stations, from what I've seen, you've probably seen a lot more than I have, are generally better at this. They appreciate that you've got whopping machines and people are safer in the cab than they are out of them. Now, I think that's where the key to this is. I used to have situations on sites where we'd be building plots for validations, etc. Then you've got the bricklayers following behind. You've got then the interior trades, but you've got them all on the same street, right? So this one's being dug, and this one over here is being painted, and everything in between. Well, you think down that street, if you took 10 houses on a street and everyone's at a different stage, you've got excavators tracking up and down the road because, for whatever reason, we decided an excavator is now a forklift. So we pick stuff up and move it about with the forks. Rubbish things. Horrendous for track wear. All kinds of things. You're running mud up my road. Why? Got telehandler for that. Keep the telehandler on the tarmac, and then you don't have to sweep your road. And anyway, all the things. But you then have pedestrian walkways. You've got pedestrian walkways everywhere because you can't walk anywhere on site that pedestrian walkway, and you've virtually got them to the door of the plot. Well, they're in the way of people. They're getting thrown out the way, and people are trying to squeeze around things. Blokes trying to dig some services in the road. You just have people. There's way too many people on the job. How about this? You create a situation where the ground workers have an area. If you walk beyond that fence, I don't mind whether it's a bit of pedestrian fencing, chapter 8, could be the orange Murphy bunting or whatever, couldn't it? A line, that's groundwork area. But the ground workers, they're mainly in machines because you've got GPS running maybe. You're digging footings, you don't need a man on the staff anymore. There's no risk of him falling in. There's no need for him to be hit by the machine. He's not going to get run over by the dumper. Your man on the dumper can stay on the dumper because if people talk about cabs on dumpers, why do we not just have a roll bar on a dumper? Not a roll bar, a cab like I've got a Mind mini digger. That's like a frame. Because you still wouldn't be able to hit them if they were within a frame. There's the glass and everything. Nice as they are. But the principle being that man then, he's not getting on and off that machine. He's not slipping, tripping. He's then not becoming a pedestrian hazard. All of the issues associated with that. So you've got people, running around like that. Maybe we should work like the Americans do more, where you have a gravel skip for your drainage, and that's brought in with a wheel loader or a telehandler with a bucket or whatever, and you've got people then serving the gravel to your team in the trench. You'll always have a man in the trench. You have to. It's just a reality. We'll never be able to. No fancy tilt rotator will ever be able to lay pipe. But you've reduced the amount of people on that job. You haven't got the bloke with a dumper. We're digging out the back of dumpers. Well, it's just rubbish, isn't it? Have one dumper driver who can serve multiple crews. He can do Rockaway over here. Oh, I need some shingle. Brings you shingle. That's the way I see it. Reduce the amount of people on the site, like they've done in the transfer stations. Can't run them over if they're not there. That is the fundamental part of risk assessment, isn't it? The fundamental bit.
I think that kind of brings us full circle because a lot of these cards they're not created by or for, but they are policed by the tier 1 contractors. Mm-hmm. And there is this sort of percolation down from those guys. And I think one of the issues that construction and demolition faces is the fact that everyone wants something for nothing and they want it done yesterday. Mm. Because demolition is often the first on site, you often get a case of, they've tendered for a job, they've been told they've got the job, and then 6 months later, on a Thursday afternoon, you start Monday.
Yes.
And full well that then reverberates right the way through the supply chain. So, the piling contractor is chomping at the bit to get on there. The frame guys everything is condensed into the minimum possible time. Whereas the approach you just said there, spread it out a bit, take your time, have one trade and another trade and another trade. Yes, they will follow along, but keep them apart.
There is always overlap. There is always overlap. You will always have ground workers doing finishings, you know, and you can't just keep everyone apart whilst the painter's still painting and there's a bit of this going on and whatever. That will always happen. But predominantly, the large machinery can be kept away from the people. There's only one vehicle that should be going up and down that road, and that is a telehandler, in my opinion, which makes the whole place a whole lot safer. You could reduce the amount of walkways you need because you haven't got the plant movements running about if you set your site up right. It's not always easy to have, not every site has a lovely material compound at the beginning of it. Sometimes you just can't do that. You know, it doesn't work for whatever reason. But I just think it's a different way of thinking, and you've got to try and you eliminate the hazard rather than reduce or come up with a new safety thing. You know, where do you steal more high-vis or whatever it might be? Everyone has beacons on their heads. I don't know what they're going to come up with next, but it does feel like it's a what will they come up with next? And because of that, it just undermines it, doesn't it? Again, undermining.
It's the same as, this is one of Fred's bugbears, you know, this idea of wearable devices, you know, whether a wristwatch or something you pin on your high-vis or you have it clipped to your hard hat. But we are in an industry, as we've already said, you know, we've got people that will forget and will leave their hard hat with the beacon in it in the site canteen and then go for a stroll. You know, we're kind of making a rod for our own back, and as you say, it will be what comes next.
But the more things you ask them to do, the more things they will forget, because there gets to a point where you come on site, you want to start work. I've got a permit to dig. I actually have one up there on my board. I've got to get my permit to dig. I've got to get my risk assessments in place. I've got to do all of that. Well, you know, even just on a day-to-day, I've got my machine checks to do. I've got maybe 3 or 4 guys who are doing multiple different jobs. You've got to kind of think, right, well, I need to organise you, and you've got materials, and the phone's ringing, and there's deliveries trying to queue up at the gate, and you know what I mean? It makes it harder, and you will forget the stupid things like your hard hat, won't you? And you'll run out there to try and stop that lorry because he's running away, and you haven't got your hat on, and suddenly you've breached the world's security, and it's just... It happens because sites are way too manic. And I just think your point earlier about sites starting before, it's running before you can walk, that used to happen so often in house building. Horrendous. Why not take a little bit longer, build a better quality product with a little bit more time? But no, it's always need to get them through. And I used to find that design hadn't even finished and we'd still be building. I remember doing a concrete pour on an RC frame, and there were rebar schedules changing, and we were pouring that day. What do I do with that? I remember bringing the engineer up going, well, it's pointless, mate. We're on that floor. Column B is like long gone, mate, you know? That was poured 2 hours ago. What? Well, what was wrong with your design 2 hours ago? You know, like, I can't change this stuff because it's all pushed to the last minute, or client changes, and anyway, all of that is a much bigger issue. Bringing it back to cards, it wraps into that because it's just, I come back to undermining it really. It undermines the whole thing, just undermines your safety really, and the cards should be part of safety. They should be respected. You should want to own one, I think. I should want to own one. I should want to have one. It's got a good record of what I can do. I've never done deep drainage. Deep as my digger digs is 3 metres, so I haven't done deep drainage, you know, that's not my experience. And that card should tell you that, because if you hire me in an agency, I'm really good in the digger, I grade pretty well. Obviously, you know, deep drain, stick me in a high reach, never done that, you know what I mean? It's sort of, but I've got a ticket, haven't I?
And imagine the damage you could do with that.
I'd have a go.
So, something miraculous happens, and somebody phones you up and says, we've made you Lord High Chancellor of construction cards. You've got 1 day. What's the first thing you do?
I don't know. Can you buy it back off Knockan and get some control of it? I don't know. Do we sue Knockan for having a crap card scheme? They tried suing the CSCS scheme, right, for loss of earnings. I mean, that just sums up the whole thing. Mark, in 1 day, I don't know if you could fix it, honestly. But I get your principle. What would you change? Where would you start? The whole thing needs scrapping and restarting, and I'm not even sure you can save the word CSCS card. I just think anything that's got that title now is just so far down the pan. You could make it the best thing in the world. What I would like to see is a card scheme where you come into a site and you can, you know, stick it into a card reader, essentially like we do with the banks and things, and it tells you, welcome, Mr. Guns. You know, yes, you're signed in today. because you've put your card in. Bang, number one, record of me being on site. Number two, it's got any information, contact information on their date of birth, next of kin, all that kind of crap they want to try and get on your induction form that we fill in so many times over. Number three, it could be that you've actually been inducted here before, no problem. You know, or maybe you haven't, and therefore it's sort of, you know, comes up, flags up. You can just have so much data behind that. It could have all your experience, you know. You can drive, you know, it's got all your telehandler, it's got that on. I don't know, I just see it as being, we've got all this data you could use with this, you know, with this card. Why can't it all be part of it? And why can't I have further progression in my career and want to further myself and want to progress and get almost a kind of degree level qualification in carpentry, bricklaying, excavator driving, be what it is? Why not? Because if I'm a labourer, well, I can go from labouring to a trade. Once I hit the trade, I'm a trade now.
You've hit the ceiling.
Do you know what I say, isn't it? So why can't I progress further? And that gives you a bit of motivation, and therefore it can justify better wage and all of that stuff.